Okay, the purpose of this presentation is to focus on one of the key aspects of the Ambit model, which is looking at how we work within a network. Now, this follows exactly the same principles that apply to all our practices, which is that we start from an idea of mentalization. So the first thing that you'll see is that mentalization and a network. So we apply the idea of mentalization to making sense of how a network operates around a young person. Now we have a slightly sort of odd title to this kind of area of working, which we call it addressing network disintegration. And I'm going to just explain a little bit during this talk as to why we've come to this, what might be seen as a slightly negative kind of starting point around networks. Okay. So just giving it a bit of a kind of initial structure. The Ambit sort of has a starting point, but there's kind of three phases of the work that goes on in typical kind of interventions using an Ambit structure. One is that there's a stage one, which is that there's an effort to understand the young person's situation from what we call multi-domain problem assessment. So we don't just focus on the immediate presenting difficulty. From the start, we're trying to look at things as a young person's life difficulties. So the focus is on looking at different domains of life: education, social care, pleasure and recreational activity, mental health in terms of young person's state of mind, depression, anxiety, those kind of things, use of drugs, but kind of a wide-ranging kind of look at what's the young person's predicament. And that's part of the first phase. The second phase is where we're trying to then, having established a relationship, we would then try and build on ways of trying to improve the young person's life. And lastly, there will be a process of handing back to the network of which the young person is, in a sense, the natural ecology, the natural network that the young person's life is embedded in. Now this whole thing assumes one fundamental thing, that Ambit cannot, as a kind of approach, be delivered on its own. We need to work with the network. The network is fundamental to the whole approach because the idea is that the young person's difficulties are all linked together. We don't focus on one problem and try and exclude our understanding of the wider sense of the young person's difficulties. So working with the network is central. It's not an additional kind of element to how Ambit operates. The first thing then is we just do an exercise called mapping the network. Now I'm just going to this is again, all the techniques we have here, you don't need any equipment here. You just need a piece of paper and a pencil. You can do this kind of stuff. And it's very much designed this way. We just map the network. Now the network can include all sorts of people here. It's not a professional network, it's just a network. Who is in the young person's life? So here we've got grandmother, girlfriend, youth worker, YOS worker, police, head of year at school, main friendships, possibly even involved in gangs, social worker, education social worker, all sorts of people, father. We include them all together. The network is not a professional system. It is inclusive of the relationships that exist around the young person, some of which are professional and they involve people having specific responsibilities towards the young person. So we just say, who's in this young person's life? Who are the key people? Usually, but not always, this would involve family members. Okay. So we map it in a very simple way. Put the young person in the middle of a bit of paper, start with the young person, and we then just draw out who are the key people. In this one, the example, whether this is a young person living with his grandmother, who's providing day-to-day care. The other kind of key relationship in his life is the other relationship with his girlfriend. He also gets on reasonably well with a youth worker in the local neighbourhood. So we just start to, just by doing this, just draw them out, okay, and we're sort of, the kind of distance from in the drawing slightly emphasises the degree to which this person's importance in the young person's life. So people that are sort of we draw them closer to the young person, it automatically assumes a certain kind of closeness. And we put people together who kind of know each other. So you end up with a kind of complicated map that might look something like this, where you kind of just you've got to kind of is a slightly rough and ready kind of way of describing the young person's social ecology, social kind of network. And you'll see in this that we've put various people a little bit kind of linked, or some people in the way of others. In this particular one, we've got a kind of we've got an idea that the young person's brother, an older brother, is involved in a gang, and the gang has organised around substance misuse, and that the young person's father has also has a history of using cannabis and a previous history of using heroin. So that there's probably some kind of network, or some sort of sub-network around brother, father, and linked to substance misuse, of which the young person is influenced by. And then there's also, I suppose, what's a feature of these kind of quick mappings is the degree to which the professional network may be linked together or not. In this particular one, the Ambit worker may be part of a team linked to a psychiatrist who may have had previous contact and maybe peripheral contact with the young person at this stage. So we're just trying to get an impression of what is the network around the young person. What I would want to emphasise is this is based on a belief and perceptions. We're not having to test this all out, it's just saying, this is how I see it. As the Ambit worker, this is how I see the young person's life. The young person, and in some cases you may want to do this with the young person, you can map it out together. Who's closest, who's furthest away, who's useful, who's not useful, who knows each other, who doesn't know each other in the network around the young person. So again, one doesn't want to overemphasise the science of this. It's not about you have to check it all out. You're just trying to get an impression, a kind of picture of the young person's social context. This can be done, if one wants to do this in a more elaborate way, in a team, if we're trying to kind of work out what is the young person's kind of predicament, what's their social context. You can do this with a team sculpting exercise, and the use of this is described more fully in the manual, in which you get a team to really kind of just literally position themselves in the room to try and understand the nature of the young person's social situation. It's not necessary for day-to-day work to be able to do that. Okay. So that's the network. Now we want to sort of think now about what we call addressing disintegration. Why do we start with this kind of odd kind of idea about disintegration? Well, the assumption here is that despite good intention, there are lots of reasons why networks around a young person may not operate as if they have a single shared mind. They do not have a single shared mind. They have unique points of view and unique responsibilities towards the young person and towards each other that may or may not lead to an entirely harmonious or shared and single understanding about what needs to be done. Our starting point, why we talk about disintegration, is that rather than making an assumption that everybody has a shared point of view, we make an assumption that people do not have a shared point of view, but we are not troubled by this. This is a starting point of which we expect agencies, we expect individuals to start from points of difference. The task for the Ambit worker is how, over time, we try to enable those points of difference to work together in a collaborative and effective way. We think this isn't just, I suppose we want to emphasise, this isn't just about just making sure everyone knows what each other's doing. There's a lot of very sensible efforts to try to help people to know what each other's doing. That's a sort of coordination of practice. Well, we're going to something a little bit more intricate here, in that we're trying to understand why it is that people have different points of view about a young person's difficulties. And we've tried to think about this in terms of 3 levels. The names of these levels have changed a bit as we've developed the idea. The first level, we talk about the level of explanation. That different people will have different ideas of what's the problem. Why is the young person behaving or thinking or feeling the way they are? Why are they so depressed? Why can't they get out of bed? Why are they using drugs? Why are they violent towards their mum? people will have different ideas as to why this is happening. So it seems these are legitimate, often important, different points of view, and our emphasis is saying, okay, let's talk about why it is that we think this young person is thinking and feeling and behaving in the way that they are. And our experience in networks is sometimes what gets skated past is, in efforts to coordinate practice between different professionals in a sensible way, is that there isn't a discussion as to what it is that has led to this young person feeling and thinking the way they are. The second level of disintegration or difference is in ideas about intervention, i.e. what to do. People will have different ideas about what a young person's need, what the best way of meeting a young person's needs might be. This would be, for example, maybe that for some people they might think the family situation is so troubled and difficult that the young person's interests will be best met by them being looked after. Another point of view might be that what the young person needs, really more than anything, is they need a change of school, or for some, for example, a family might have a view that really what needs to happen is the young person needs to be given a very good talking to, probably slightly more than a kind of talking to, whether that might be involved with police and some sort of people being, and the young person realising the severity of the difficulties or the type of antisocial behaviour that they are carrying out. So there'll be lots of quite blunt, quite big theories as to what might be helpful, of which therapy and a mental health intervention or use of medication would be another kind of element of it. And with the sort of level of difficulty that we often focus on with Ambit teams, now some of these interventions will be quite major, and in some sense the sort of interventions that often these young people experience are quite major, like permanent exclusion from school, or custodial sentences, or these kind of things. These are sense interventions, not necessarily always constructed in the most positive way. The third area that we kind of focus on that there's potential for differences of view or disintegration is responsibility. And the question here is, who does what? Now, in some ways it's quite obvious. What teachers have to do teaching, social workers have to do social working, and those kind of things are not necessarily, not always complicated. Though sometimes in the kind of outreach area, quite a lot of people might be doing things that are reasonably overlapping. There's sort of also areas that kind of create some difficulties is, who's the key worker? Often there can be a kind of a slight sort of, we'll come to it in a minute, but there are reasons in which that there may be quite subtle kind of different difficulties as to whose case is it. Is this predominantly a YOS case? If a youth offending service are involved, they may say, look, we're the key people. This is the key issue is to avoid this young person having a custodial sentence. The network should be organised around the YOS kind of priorities. Whereas a school might say, well, actually, I don't think the biggest thing, the likelihood of that is not as high. He's been involved in some trouble. The critical issue is how we address the attendance issues because he's not engaged in school. And for the mental health practitioners, they may be saying, well, actually, this is a young person with severe depression, self-harming behaviour. Actually, the way we should organise the network should be around addressing his mental health needs. So that who does what is often about who's the kind of centre of an organising network. And there can be genuine and appropriate and well-intentioned differences as to how these get worked out. So we're focused on those are the kind of like levels of disintegration. We talk about domains of disintegration. This really applies to individuals or agencies. So, for example, examples would be we could think about the family. Do the family have a point of view about the young person's needs? But sometimes we have a collective kind of domain, or we might have an individual saying, okay, what's the grandmother's view about this? So the idea of domain is that we sort of slips between both it can be an individual or it can be a kind of a more collective thing, such as an agency. So we might have the youth worker, might be a domain, or a school might be a domain. It's a fluid idea. Obviously, in some sense, a school doesn't have a point of view. From a mentalising point of view, the school doesn't have a shared mind. but in some sense that the school might come to a view. I mean, things like exclusions, the school has come to a view about the young person's needs collectively. So we move a little bit fluidly here between another example with Cam's team, and it also includes both professional and non-professional. So we include grandmother, best friend, girlfriend, these things as appropriate, as we see as the most key people within the young person's network. So this idea is that we try and match up domains on the one hand, just who are the kind of, a bit like stakeholders on the one hand, with these levels of disintegration. Now, the third kind of bit of this kind of matrix that we're building up slowly is that it's just recognising processes of disintegration. Again, the aim here is to move away from defensive kind of understandings of network issues, because if I can just digress for a moment, it's not uncommon for professionals within the child kind of system to experience a degree at times of frustration in the way that networks function. Although the descriptions are of integrated practice and teams working together, the day-to-day experience is often more intricate and more complicated. And the sort of themes that can easily come up, which I've alluded to already, is things like there will be a degree of kind of conflict and just genuine disagreement about what might be best for a young person. There may be conflicts about who carries the greatest authority and responsibility for a particular young person, again, which I've already alluded to. There can be kind of fears and rivalries between agencies, and particularly between families and agencies. Fears, obvious and well recognised fears for families about the possibility of kids being taken into care, those kind of things that easily lead to kind of all kinds of tensions and difficulties that these are not the intended ways that networks would operate. One of the other things would be, that networks function less than perfectly in the degree to which people are able to communicate to each other in a timely way. In busy and often extremely busy kind of teams, the degree to which there is the potential for communication not to occur at the time at which it is required is incredibly easy, of which those communications can easily lead to difficulties and frustrations if people feel they should have been told about something and aren't told about it. And this, I think, can easily lead to one of the things that we would want to emphasise strongly here, which is that there's a capacity to develop beliefs about that all agencies and staff within agencies develop beliefs about other agencies, which I think can easily undermine the capacity for networks to work together.